Hey everyone, since releasing my tutorial Basics of Natural Environments about a month ago, I've had a little bit of feedback, and so I'm just doing an extra couple of chapters just to go over a couple of extra things. First one being creating shaders for Arnold. A few people were a bit upset that I used Redshift and not Arnold because they don't have Redshift, and so to make this tutorial a bit more valuable to a wider audience, I'm deciding to do a chapter just going over creating the same assets but using Arnold instead. So as you can see here, this is the Redshift render view. So this is currently what the grass looks like. This is how it was exported at looking like this. So in this scene, I'm just going to go through and just rebuild the shaders using Arnold and rebuilding the lighting and everything. So yeah, let's get started with that. So I'm just going to close this, and the first thing we'll do is the dirt shader. Now this will be very similar to how I did the rock shader and also the bark shader on the tree. So let's start off by hitting tab and typing in standard, and then we'll get the standard surface. Here it is, and then we'll just name this grass shader. There we go. Now recently I actually found out about a cool method of bringing in maps here. I didn't realize you can actually drop and drag from a folder, which makes it a lot faster. Soil with grass, and then we want the albedo, displacement, EXR, roughness, and specular. I'll just click and drag those over. It's just a lot easier doing it this way. Rather than creating the file nodes one by one, it just automatically does it for you. So I'm just gonna set these up in the order that I like to do it. So I go albedo, then specular, then roughness. Ooh. And then displacement. Okay. So to begin with, we'll hook up the displacement. So I'm just going to create a displacement shader node, delete the shading group, and then I also need a plus minus node. So create a plus minus average. I'm going to create two new categories here and go -0.5 in the bottom one. This is just rebalancing the displacement to have a mid value of 0, because right now it's a mid value of 0.5. And there we go. So it's correct. And then output 3D X goes into displacement. All right, so that should be good to go. And now let's plug the displacement into the shading group. So I'll select that. Displacement, middle mouse click and drag, and there we go. All right, now let's do the other ones. So albedo can just go directly into color. I'm going to make sure the color weight is set to 1, so I'm getting all of that information. I'm just going to move these down. Ooh, didn't select the roughness. Move these down a bit. Now the specular and the roughness, I generally like to have a bit of control on those. So AI color correct. There we go. And I'm going to need 2 of these, so Control D to create another one. Alright, drop that one into there. Drop this one into here. And then hook them up to their respective areas. So this one's going to go into color for specular. And then roughness is right here, so I'm going to drop that in. But automatically it does out alpha, which isn't what we want. We want out color R into the specular roughness. And that should be good. Okay, now there's one other thing. When we built this shader, we actually tiled it a bit. So the repeat UV is 5 by 5 on all of these. So I need to make sure I come down here and do the same here. So 5 by 5, 5 by 5, 5 by 5, and 5 by 5. That's it. I'm just hitting tab there to go over to the next one. That's like the hotkey. And then the intensity here is 1, but here it's 5. So we'll make sure the displacement intensity is high enough to see the detail. because we're putting this on quite a large plane. So, but yeah, that should be about it. I'm just going to go through here and double check my settings. IOR doesn't matter too much for the dirt. We're not seeing it that much, and 1.52 should be fine. Making sure the weight is at 1, and apart from that, it's a pretty simple shader, so that's all we really need to do here. So yeah, you can see the difference between the two. They're both quite small shader setups. Alright, now let's go on and do the grass. So here's the grass shader in Redshift. So I'm just going to come down here, hit tab, type in standard, so standard surface again, and then let's drag that up, and once again I'm just going to navigate to where the textures exist. So grass, assets, textures, billboard, and these are all the maps that you get when you download something like this from Megascans, but I'm just going to select a few. So I want the albedo, I don't want any of these, I want the displacement, I don't want the gloss, I want the normal map, opacity, roughness, specular, and translucency. I'm just going to drag all those over, and once again it automatically just brings in all the file nodes, which is super handy considering like we need a lot of maps for the grass, so it's way easier than manually creating these one by one. But once again, I'm going to start with albedo, so bring that one up to begin with. And then specular, where's specular normal? And it's cool, it's good that it names them as well, because it's just, you know exactly what's what, and everything's already connected up for you, so yeah, it's not a big deal. Next we'll do translucency, and then we will do opacity, and then normal, and then displacement. Okay, that is it. I'm just going to line all these up so it looks nice and tidy, and I'm going to drop the albedo in and make sure this is set to 1 just like before. Then I'm going to work on displacement. I'm going to create a disp shader again, exactly the same as before, and I'm going to drop that into displacement and then drag it down to line up here. We're also going to use a plus minus node, exactly the same as just before with the dirt. It's the same procedure. So -0.5, and this is just because Arnold natively likes to work with a displacement with a mid value of 0. These maps have a mid value of -0.5, and so if you're not 100% sure what I'm talking about when I'm saying that stuff, like if that's really foreign to you, just do a little bit of research on displacements, and you should get the idea. It takes a little bit to get your head around if you're very new to displacements, but once you understand them, they're extremely powerful, and I love using them in all my workflows. Next is normal, so let's drop that under geometry here. I'm going to drop it in bump mapping, and that'll automatically create a bump 2D node. You can see it's also collapsed our shader, which isn't great. But I'll just quickly reposition everything here. Like so. Alright. Next is opacity. That also goes under geometry. Translucency. That is going to go under subsurface. So let's set this to roughly 0.25 because we want to be able to see through the grass. And now, usually subsurface scattering is quite heavy. Arnold used to have back face, just like Redshift does. It had a very, very similar setup here where you had backlighting, but it was called like back face shading or something. But that is now gone. It no longer exists up here under diffuse. So you need to turn on thin walled because we're dealing with cards. And then as you can see, it grays out these two options here once you turn on thin walled. And I did a test between diffusion and random walk and there was no difference. So just leave it on diffusion, crank up the weight as much as necessary. Maybe you'll need to go to 0.5, maybe you need to go higher, but I'm just going to set it to 0.25 and see how that goes. But but yeah, that's the best option, and it doesn't render too slowly. Like it's a lot faster than actually using transmission. So don't use transmission here. So roughness, that then goes into obviously roughness. Once again, make sure that we have where is it? Yep, there. Not out alpha, we want out color R plugged in, and then specular, that'll also go in. And once again, I actually want to have control over these two. So AI, because AI color correct, because what Megascans dials their like calibrates their specular and roughness maps to might not always be the look that you want to go for. Like maybe you want your grass to be a little more shiny, maybe you want it to be a bit more dull than how they have it set up. So I just like assigning a color correct, so I have a bit of control there to adjust it. So here's the other color correct for the roughness. Drop that in, and then once again make sure out color R is going into the roughness. And there we go. That should just about do it. Let's just check the settings here. Subsurface weight, geometry is good. Specular seems fine. Yeah, so yeah, we should be good for a first test here. Now the next thing to do is to assign it to the correct geometry. So what I'm going to go and do here, I know this RS sprite node is currently assigned to the shading group of the grass. So I'm just going to right click and go select objects with material, and then right click here and go assign to viewport selection. And I'm going to do the exact same. Oh, I named this grass. This should be dirt. And then this one should be grass. Okay, and then same with this one. So I'm just going to right click here, select object with material, and then right click assign material. Okay, so now that's all assigned, but we don't have correct lighting. So we got the dome light here. I'm just going to Control A, Control C this HDRI, and I'm going to Control H to hide that dome light. And I'm going to go to Arnold Lights, Sky Dome Light. And then I got to create a file node here. So select file and then Control V in here. And then we've got our HDRI plugged in, and it should appear here. You can actually visualize it, unlike Redshift. Okay. And we're going to want to have it rotated in a similar way that we had the Redshift one, just to make sure that we're getting a similar result. Alright, I think that's all we need to do. So let's open the Arnold render view. And I'm just going to go render, update full scene. Okay, so straight away we can see an issue here, and that is the opacity isn't working. So let's minimize this, and we're going to select the Mesh Repro Mesh, which is the grass here, and we're going to go to Arnold, and opaque is turned on, so we need to switch that off, and then that'll make it visible. Another thing that we haven't done but need to do is apply subdivisions and displacement. Before I do that though, I'm going to stop my scene from rendering. Oh, it is, yeah, I'm just going to stop it anyway. But it's not in IPR mode at the moment. It's just rendering without updating. But anyway, let's assign iterations. So I'm going to give this iterations of 3 and turn on auto bump and set it to Cat Clark. And I'm going to do the same with the ground. So the ground can be 6. Actually, I'm just going to set it to 5 because we barely see it, so we don't need it that high. And auto bump turned on as well. Actually, what I might do is hide the grass, and so we can calibrate this. I'm also going to hide these original grass pieces, and now we can go back to the render and render update full scene. We're just going to make sure that the dirt is looking how we would expect, and it's looking a little dull. Like we can see we got a bit of detail in here, like the displacement's working nicely, but I I'd like it to look a bit more wet. So what I'm going to do is go back to the hypershade. I'm just going to select these files here and just remove them from the view. And now we go to the dirt shader and we're going to go to Specular. And I believe the Specular map's a little too dark. So I'm going to bring back the render and I'm just going to resize this so we can update it on the fly. Alright. Okay. And let's set the gamma to 2 and then hit play. And you can see now we're getting a bit of sheen to it. We're seeing a bit more detail in the ground. Yeah, it's more what I want. I'm just going to hold down shift and click and drag to get a marquee of a region. Okay. Yeah, it's not too bad. Maybe I'll try 1.5 just because it looks a little glossy. And that's probably better. Yeah, I like that. Okay, let's stop this. And let's bring the grass back now that we know that the ground is good. Another thing that I need to do is switch my render settings from Redshift to Arnold. It's still kind of like, because I'm rendering with the Arnold rendering engine, it's realizing that this is what I mean, but like it's picking up the Arnold render engine, but we also need to update some of the settings. So camera AA is by default a 3, which is quite low, but that's all we need. And then I'm going to set diffuse and specular to 1. Transmission, we're using no transmission, so I'm going to set that to 0. And SSS, we're using a bit of SSS, so I'll leave that at 2, just so it's not too noisy. Now, ray depth is really important. I'll show you why in a second, but by default, it's 10, 1, 1, 8, and then a transparency depth of 10. And I also like to set my bucket size to 32. Okay, let's go back to the render, and I have unhidden the grass. So I'm going to go render, update full scene. Okay, so we'll let a few more samples pick up here. Actually, I'll just marquee an area just so it goes faster. And I'm going to hit play. And the first thing you're going to notice, and this isn't a problem that we have with Redshift because Redshift has that sprite node, but we're getting all this black. And what's happening here is the opacity is only working through 10 cards of grass. So the top bits here are fine because we're not looking through too many cards, but as you come lower down, we're seeing through 10 cards of grass, and then we're hitting a point where it's just going to render black because we don't have that transparency depth. We don't have enough depth. So what we need to do here is go back to the settings. And our transmission depth, we can actually drop quite low. So let's set that to 2, which then 1 plus 1 plus 2 equals 4. So I generally set the total to the max between these values. And then the depth is going to need to increase. So we have a lot of cards here. So we should really be pumping this up to something like 50. But let's just try 25. And really, like, I haven't done enough testing with Arnold and transparency depth, but I don't think it affects render time too much, but I think it definitely does slow it down a little. 25, I think, I did a test earlier, and I think it gets rid of majority of the black regions, but yeah, if you want to be sure, then you just really need to crank this transparency depth up. And as I said in the previous chapters, the system that I'm using to render this is actually quite low spec. So if you have a higher spec computer, like, you probably won't have much trouble rendering this. It should be running considerably faster to the speed mine is. But yeah, 25 should be fine. I know there are going to be some little black specks in here, because we'll be hitting that limit of 25 layers of grass. So I'm just going to close this now, and I'm going to stop this render. Actually, let's just let it run a bit longer. And next, I'm probably just going to tweak a few more settings because I want to get a bit of like gloss in here. I might also increase the brightness, actually. So let's increase the exposure by 0.5. just to get a bit more light in here. So instantly you can see it's a bit brighter. And then let's go to the hypershade now, and I think the specular might be able to come up a little bit. Oh, that's on the dirt, my bad. So here's the grass shader. So the specular can come up to, let's say, 2. And the roughness, let's bring it down to 0.5. Just because we want less roughness to make it look more shiny. Okay, so I just paused the recording for a bit and I did a bit of tweaking to the shader, just a bit of back and forth to try and find a happy medium, because I want to try get this as close as possible to the result I have in Redshift, and yeah, just getting the spec right is a big deal. So what I ended up sitting with is specular. I cranked right up to 5 because I want a really nice sort of glossy look to the grass, and the spec map by default was quite dark, and so yeah, once again, depending on the look you're going for, like, that might be fine, but yeah, I just wanted to really get more of a waxy look to my grass. And then roughness, it's just 0.5 gamma, so I just brought it down a bit, and that seems to work quite well. So I'm just going to do a full render here and obviously pause the video, and then we'll have a look at what the final result looks like. So yeah, I'll see you in a bit. So let's just stop this render here, get rid of the crop, and then go render, update full scene. Okay, so this is the final result. As you can see, there's some black bits in here, and so that just means that you just need to increase that setting that I was telling you about under here, transparency depth. So you might need to crank that up to 50 instead of 25, but I'm pretty sure it increases render time, so just be careful with how much you increase this. And like, as I was saying, this machine's pretty slow, but you can see down here that this render took 30 minutes, whereas this one with Redshift, which looks better, there's less noise, it took 5 minutes and 54 seconds. So I hope that gives you an idea of the difference. Now, I don't think Redshift is better than Arnold at everything. I just particularly like to use it when I'm dealing with things like environments, natural environments and stuff like that. When it comes to characters and creatures and things like that, and I'm dealing with subsurface scattering, I believe Arnold definitely does a better job in that realm. So it just depends what you're doing. And like, you can totally get better results with Arnold here. Like, if you increase the samples and things like that, you would be able to get a closer representation to this, but you just need to have the horsepower behind you to make it render faster than 30 minutes. So I hope this extra added on chapter was helpful and beneficial. Yeah, if you are using Arnold, you can definitely do that, but I'm just kind of showing the pros and cons between the two rendering engines. So yeah, hope this was helpful. See ya.